Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. I'm your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by for this latest episode of Good Trouble, where I talk about culture stuff in a spirit of education and compassion. So I know that I have not been posting as regularly as I have been. I got other things going on, but Good Trouble is not going to stop. There's always culture stuff to talk about. Welcome to the world. It never stops. And this is a fun one. I think this is a fun one because we're not just talking about games, we're talking about geeky stuff. So y'all that this isn't going to be a game focused discussion. It's going to be just our world. And the topic that we're going to talk about is Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, which, as I record this, has just come out on Disney Plus. So it came out last year in the movies, and now it's launched. And while y'all know how Disney Plus works, now way more people are watching this thing and talking about it, and we're gonna have a good time. So it's the blacks and the browns. So yeah, so I'm looking at it through my Browns lens, and I got to reach out to get some insight on the black lens of things. There was one person that I thought of first, and they, after some little niggling with scheduling, that was blessed to get them back on the show. So a black man and a brown man are going to talk about Wakanda Forever. This man, boy, does he know culture. He writes weekly for the Columbus Monthly newspaper. He is a librarian. He is in charge of Poetry Slam. The man has a nonprofit all his own. He is Columbus's own Scott Woods. Welcome back to the show,
Jason. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
That's it, yo. And a podcaster has a podcast called Race Against the Machine, which releases, it's,
Whenever we feel the need to, when we can no longer contain our
that's what this is.
feelings.
I don't care how many people watch this. I'm sure some people are gonna watch it, but this is it. I got to get this stuff out. So I like that podcast. That's a lot of insightful, excellent commentary on culture stuff. That's the topics du jour. Mention Black Panther. I'm like, this man has more thoughts about that. So let's get into it. So we're going to talk about Wakanda Forever, Black Panther 2. We're gonna mention the movie. We'll talk about some movie stuff and movie criticism, but I don't know how I roll a Good Trouble. It's gonna be a culture focused discussion and the cultural impact of it, because I truly don't believe with a film like this we can't just talk about it as a movie, which some people do. They want to talk about it as a movie, and that's valid, but like there's some people that's like, well, I don't get it. And it's like, well, you need to add the extra context in order to just get it.
Sure. Yeah.
So I have a little outline. I shared it with Scott, but before we get into that, just talk about your general, like how you received the movie generally. Like, well, first of all, did you see it at the theater? You saw it at the theater back in the day, right?
Oh, absolutely. It was very important to me that they get that dollar. Regardless of how that movie turned out. They needed to at least get my little $10.
Oh, it's only $10 for you? Oh.
Well, it may have been 12.
Yeah, that's more like it. Okay, all right. And so so I don't think we have to describe like the movie. I think people kind of get it who are watching this show. Just like so, like on a high level, talk about your initial reactions coming out of that movie.
So my initial reaction was that if you are only looking at this as like another chapter in the Marvel universe, you are making a big mistake. Yeah. And it has a job. It had a job, and I think it continues to have the job that no other Marvel movie has, right? The stakes are so different for the Black Panther movies, and this one in particular, especially so, right?
And the first one had super high stakes because of the representation and like if it was possible, it got amped up because of the circumstances, and we'll get into that, absolutely.
Yeah, but and so yeah, I just really felt like, wow, this movie is carrying a lot of weight. It was, it has to do something with the particular audience that no other film has to do, right? It has to speak to Black people in a very specific way, and it charges itself, with carrying a lot of Black people's weight.
Mm-hmm.
And then it compounded that, right, by, adding brown folk, right? It's like, oh no, Black folks I think we got a shoulder left. Let's go ahead and take them with us, And so I thought that was a profound profound risk
Mm-hmm.
that ultimately, if you are receptive to what it's trying to do and all that it wants to be, that it pays off.
Mm-hmm. We loved it. I went to see it with my wife. My wife is Haitian, which Haiti was in the movie, which that was a moment. Like that, and we'll get into
Right.
that. But like they went to Haiti and they didn't just show poverty and robbing and kill. Like they showed, at school and and people, kids happy. That was a real moment for my wife.
Yeah, yeah.
And so just so on that level, we loved it, right? But there's an onion, man. We got to unpack some of this stuff. And the very first thing that occurred to me, um the you mentioned before, like the weight, and there's the weight of like the black communities, plural, trying to answer to that directly. But this film in particular had the weight of grief,
Big
and
time.
not just the grief of a cast mourning the passing of Chadwick Boseman, which that movie so much I made a video and I'm like 7,000 degrees away from it, but like, I gotta make a video. I gotta talk about this because I remember
Mhm.
I remember the Black Panther comic coming out. And I remember, and then realizing that kind of newer vision that Christopher Priest made, and Chad was kind of like a part of that whole thing. So then so there's the grief of losing Chadwick Boseman so early, but there was just like it's a black grief.
That's
There's a
real.
black grief, and so
That's
that's
real.
really what the thing I wanted to kind of get your mind on first was, like you said before, that's real. Tell me, like, how you understand when I say that black grief.
Yeah, so like when Chadwick Boseman died, like black people felt that like very deeply across the strata of blackness,
Right.
right? Cats in the Hood was grieving, respectable Negroes was grieving, politicians was grieving, teachers
Mm-hmm.
were grieving, everybody was grieving. Like, and frankly, prior to Black Panther, I don't know if you would have gone to those respective communities and said, is Chadwick Boseman like, one of the most important black actors to you? I think we would have been like, well, I think I like this project and I like that project
Right,
and da
right.
da da. But when you put his work, his body of work collectively together, especially the work at the end of his life, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Five Bloods, the Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Black Panther. Like when you put those things together, you're seeing someone starting to really flex their muscles,
Mm-hmm.
not just their acting muscles, but their producer muscles. Like these are the projects that I believe should be in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and then that goes away, or like overnight
Right,
to us because we didn't know that
right.
he was sick. Um, Although I think if you saw like the Five Bloods, it was like, okay, something's up,
Mm.
right? So, but by then it was too late, right? And so when he passed away, like that grief was profound,
Mm-hmm.
profound. And because black people, we are thirsty for representation and we are
Mm-hmm.
thirsty for leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we see it coming, it's like, yo, I think this might be the real thing. And I think everybody felt like, Chadwick Boseman was, it was kind of like one of those Nipsey Hussle things. It was like, I think this is the real thing, and we just lost it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that grief was real and it was profound. And we had already invested so much in like the first Black Panther film
Mm-hmm.
collectively, right? Like everybody was just into, relatively speaking, everybody was into that movie.
Right.
And if you just wanted it to be a great comic movie, then it kind of was that. If you wanted to be, a socio-political commentary, it was that.
Mm-hmm.
It had all these angles to it, and then we lost the person who was in front of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was real to us, like very real. And I'm not saying that as if it's this thing that we want to be real. It is real.
Right.
And so to lose him was a big deal. And so in the minute that we found out he passed away, we automatically just looked at Black Panther 2, which at this point had not shot one piece of film, one
Right.
inch of film.
But which
Right.
was written and which was, in the can, and we knew was coming and
Mm-hmm.
all that. And we're like, oh, what's gonna happen?
Yeah. And I mean, and you saw the internet just was crazy. The internet was crazy for like
Oh yeah.
2 years,
Yeah.
until we got a trailer or something, so that grief was profound. And this movie recognized that not simply as a production company, not simply as, a bunch of people who want to make a film, like, these people love Chadwick Boseman. They were friends with him. They've been,
Yeah.
he'd been at their homes, and they all loved each other, and they loved the work that they were doing. And that's so evident, like in the first 5 minutes of this film, that is so evident. And it has to carry that not just for themselves, but for all of us at the
Mhm.
same time. And that, I mean, no more, regardless of what you think about Black Panther 2, that is its cultural reality.
I'll get into how the movie itself handled it. I guess after a bit, what struck me was, again, having my wife and having a lot of, I have a lot of friends in that community. My brother's like way into the community, all that stuff. What struck me about it was like not another one,
Mm,
right? And
mm,
that's where because like every community kind of loses, but then in the Black community, so many have been lost young. So many have been lost before they can, truly round out their corpus, right? My daughter, we've been on a kick. We've been watching a lot of the Black Cinderella movie, like the one, the Rogers and Hammerstein that came out. Whitney
yeah,
Houston,
yeah.
Whitney Houston, we lost her young. She had miles to go.
Look, we
Just
just lost, like, hip hop is losing
yo,
rappers so fast
De
now.
La Soul, man. I saw, and your reaction to it was like, it wasn't like I'm sad. It was like another one, you
Yep.
know. And I'm from the generation they just had the hip hop tribute on the Grammys.
Yeah.
Run DMC, they lost Jam Master Jay to young to violence, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And you could just go on down the line of like what's his face Humpty Dance,
Oh yeah.
we
Shock
lost
G.
him, I don't
Yeah.
know, year and a half ago, something like that.
Yeah.
Young, the and I guess so. I mean, like obviously the circumstances change, right? There's some people that is more difficult than others, but I don't think in our communities that we care how we lose them. It's just that we lost them, and there's no judgment where maybe in another community they'd be like, oh well, what were they doing, and the third thing. It's like no, like the life got them, whatever
Mm.
the life is, and however they encountered the life got them, and it sucks.
Well, what's interesting about the hip hop thing is what we're discovering now is it used to just be cats would just get shot.
Right,
Now cats are dying from like heart diseases
right,
and cancer. We're not making it to 55, 56. That's terrifying.
right.
That's not like somebody who was at the wrong place at the wrong time. That's somebody who was not taken care of, you know, by their industry or by
Mhm.
their whoever was around them, or if they or maybe they were, and it just is what it is. But it's just sad. It's so sad. I wrote an article like after Shock G because we just had like three of them back to back, and they
Mhm.
were all in their 50s, right? It was like Shock G, DMX, right? It was
Mhm.
that kind of thing happening,
Yeah, yep.
and it was just like, oh, and like, and it's definitely like like rappers are like your superheroes, right?
Yeah.
And so to watch them, only be like a few years older than you, that's those losses are regardless of how you're right, regardless of how it happens, it's just profound.
Kendrick Lamar is part of that first soundtrack. Rihanna is part of that second sound. Those movies don't happen without hip hop. So the folding in is profound. When I was watching this movie, and so all that stuff, like we're like me and my wife were both experiencing that weight, you
Mm-hmm.
know, of like, this is more than, and it's bearing, the blackness, and it's bearing grief, and it's bearing all this other stuff. And I just got this sense watching the movie, even especially with the first, however long, it was very apparent early. I got the sense that like we don't want to be making this movie. This is the
Mm-hmm.
last place we want to be, but we have to. The Marvel train moves on, and since we're here, we're gonna make it dope.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
that's the sense that I got. That like these actors did not want Ryan Coogler did not want to do that. Did not want to recast. Did not want to change back. Did not want even want to make the move. I can just imagine them saying like, "Man, I don't want to make this movie." But
Yeah.
I don't know if did you get a little bit of that sense?
Absolutely. And I feel like, look, I mean, if this had been any other character in the Marvel universe, they would have just recast it and kept going.
Right.
Right. But like enough
Right.
people stood up on this one and was like, you're not doing this, we're not doing this, we're not finna do this. And Ryan Coogler didn't have to listen to us.
Right.
He could have theoretically, he could
Yeah.
have done whatever he wanted to do. He'd already directed, and co-written one of the biggest selling movies of all time, right? So, and the biggest black one of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And so he could have done anything he wanted to with the second Black Panther, but he chose, which he has done throughout his career.
Right.
He chose to stay in community and to think and reflect and respect community. He does that whether he's making a movie or not, apparently.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When he was doing a few years ago, when we were all debating about the Oscars being so white, him and Ava DuVernay were putting together that whole kind of basically anti-Oscar event at the same time
Mm-hmm.
in Flint, Michigan. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you remember that, but
I do not.
it was, and I watched every hour of that. It was on for like 6 hours, and they were in Flint, Michigan, in some theater there, and they were bringing out musical acts. They brought out Stevie Wonder, they brought out Robert Glasper. Don't tell
Mm-hmm.
Chris Brown, and like it was just like this amazing parade of beautiful people doing beautiful things that just said, we're not going to the Oscars this year.
Right.
and that's how he is, right? Like he's there in Flint, not because of the Oscars, but because their water is killing them.
Yes.
So that's who Ryan Coogler is. And so I actually personally, I got offended when the internet would be like questioning whatever Ryan Coogler was going to do with
Right.
Black Panther. And I'm like, yo, I don't know what he's going to do, but I trust him.
Right.
I don't know when we decided that he was untrustworthy. Like I trust him a lot more than I trust like 90% of the people in Hollywood.
Right. Yeah, that discourse was like, okay, well, they have to, like we have to have T'Challa, right? People got very invested in the idea that like we know T'Challa, we have to finish T'Challa's story. And I'm like, T'Challa's cool and all, but I don't need that. Like, I don't need Steve Rogers. I don't need I get invested. And I guess like of course you can't tell people how to like act and everything and react and what they get attached to, but it's like I just couldn't imagine it's like really we need like it's a whole, and we'll actually get into this too, especially when it comes to the Hispanic side, when we get there, but like maybe there was something about the way they presented Wakanda of like, they only focus on a couple of characters. And it's like, it constructed this idea of like, okay, we have to have the tentpole characters in order for the story to be told. So I don't know, maybe people got into that, but it's like, as soon as that happened, it's like, okay, no. And because I happen to know that Shuri in the comics got the mantle. So it's like, all right, hey, just give it Shuri. There you go. That's when she got the comics. And I think people coming at it from a whole, like different wanting different perspective. And so I was into it. So I was in as soon as like me and my wife looked at it, and my wife loves Shuri, so it's like, okay, Shuri's my pet now, right? I'm like, yeah, that's happening.
Yeah,
So
I was hoping they would take another direction, but honestly, I was like, whatever it is, I'm sure it'll be fine, right?
yeah,
Like most people don't know what they want. They think they know what they want until they see someone who has put in thought and work and
right.
care to at least give you another perspective. And so, sure, like were people gunning for other angles and other options? Sure, but I don't think, again, I don't think most people are very good at narrative. And so I
Right.
think we all just kind of needed to chill and just wait and see what he was going to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, they don't call us fans for nothing. It's short for fanatic.
Right.
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 I think a lot. There was also a strain of like, okay, give it to M'Baku because Winston Dukes did a great job. Which you had mentioned that in your podcast, it made me laugh so much that like Ryan Coogler took the ape man and made him cool. How do you
He
do that?
did what I thought was impossible.
How do you take this racist, nasty? If you look at the comic, like the man ape or something like that, jumping at you
Yes.
from the jungles,
Yes.
and he made it cool. So I was like,
I'm
unbelievable.
telling you, the minute I heard that character was in the first movie, I was like, this is gonna be trash.
Yeah,
Like, and I was so glad that
right.
he did not go there. Like, I'm still kind of in shock at the intelligence that it took to reimagine that character that way.
Right.
And then in the second film to expand on his
Mm-hmm.
on what they built about him in the first movie, right? Like
Right.
they'd already made the case that this is not, we're not playing the old racist stereotype type situations. And then they just built on top of that just a deeper, more resonant character.
Mhm.
I'm just so impressed with that character now.
I am very impressed with what Ryan Coogler is able to do within the Marvel box,
Mm,
and it's hard to do that. It's hard to, because Marvel gives you toys. It's
hmm.
almost like, that what's that show, Chopped? Like Marvel gives you the ingredients. And sometimes they weird. You don't want to
Yes.
work in the beef tongue or alligator spleen or whatever it is. You don't want the but you got to cook it. And Ryan
Mhm.
Coogler did the best that he could to cook it. And I think there's a double edge there. One, it's amazing what he can do within the box. Two, I felt the box at times. So I don't know
Definitely.
which one you want. We're talking about like what Ryan Coogler was able to do, but if you want to continue with that way, we can, or if you want to talk about kind of the limitations that you felt.
I'm open. I'm open. But I do agree with you. There was certainly moments, plenty of like whole parts of the setup that I'm like, okay, here
Yeah.
comes Marvel. I guess I got to sprinkle a little Marvel on this.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think okay. So speaking of what Ryan Coogler was able to do, so we love M'Baku. Like we love all the characters really, like Okoye, and I think all the characters are great. And then
mhm.
it's almost like when Chad died. Speaking of like Black grief, when Chadwick died, Angela Bassett stood up and said, "I'm killing this." Like she wasn't as much of a presence in the first movie because she didn't have to be,
Right.
because T'Challa was that temple. So then, a woman with her chops comes in and happens to be in house and says, "I'ma kill this." And my wife was like, we were both riveted when it came to that performance. So like that
Mhm.
speaks to what was good about that. But then we're doing full spoilers, so it's like, you please, I don't even want to
Okay.
hear about that. And then midway through the movie, like towards like kind of that first climatic scene, she dies, and then I felt the Marvel.
Mm,
And then I felt the Marvel.
mm.
You nod at that. I don't know if you know what I'm really talking about
Well,
there.
in what way? Tell me in what way you felt it.
So okay, so like Shuri is on this. Shuri is grieving the whole time, right?
Yes.
And in a way, in terms of the movie carrying the grief, Shuri's grief is very apparent. Basically throughout the entire movie, and so is Queen Ramonda. So like it was great to see kind of how they played off each other. Like this is what you do with your grief, two different paradigms, all that kind of stuff. And then you remove Ramonda in the way that they did, which is okay. That's that. I was like, oh wow, and that really affected me. And Shuri reached her breaking point and all that kind of stuff. Um, and then Shuri, like, okay, now we get into the superhero origin story. Now we get the spider bite, which in her case was taking the herb. And now she wakes up and now she could punch stuff. It's like, which is what every Marvel character does. And it's like, and I get that that's kind of like the Black Panther. She does that in the comics too. But it's like, I'm looking at it going, man, now she's like every other hero.
Mm,
He's solving her problems with her fists, and so theoretically she's going on this vengeance kick, which I thought that would have been cool. But the vengeance kick came after 2 hours into the movie, so it's like, okay, we got to wrap this up. So it's not
mhm.
really a vengeance kick; it's just a kickstart to the climax of the movie. And then we get the fight, and then she becomes basically the replacement for T'Challa in the next Avengers, whatever they decide to do.
Yeah.
And we know what happens to the Black Panther in the Avengers movie. It's like, okay, we're they just kind of like one of, he's superhero number 7. So I felt like um it felt very rich while Ramonda was a temple, and removing that temple, I felt like the Marvel held the movie up, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
I feel you. I think for me, like there really wasn't anything that Angela Bassett could do wrong at that point, right? Like, like I don't want to say she's carrying the film because I think that's a little much to
Okay.
say, but because it's definitely an ensemble production at this
Yes.
point, right?
I think in terms
Um,
of like that's who they people are reacting to.
Oh, no doubt, no
You
doubt.
know, so
Right,
like
no doubt.
M'Baku is like, he's trying to do his thing. He's eating his banana, and like, but it's that's only cool in reference to Queen Ramonda trying to regulate.
Yeah.
And Shuri is doing her grieving thing, and she's like, doing I don't believe in the ancestors, and I'm going to do the secular thing, and I try to, and that works relative to Ramonda's, okay, you have to be with tradition, and we have to keep this moving. And
Hmm.
then that's this, I guess that's what I mean. Not that she was like the main actress, but
Right,
like
right,
she
right.
was the focus of a lot of the characters.
Got you. Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that. Um, it's funny because like for me, I think there are several kind of Marvel strictures here.
Yes.
But I think the one that really got in my teeth, man, was the Ironheart character. Like I
Oh,
just really
okay.
felt like she was shoehorned into this.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, come on, man. I know she got a series coming. I know, blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah, 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 blah. And look, I'm not mad at another black character, right? Like, bring it on.
Mm-hmm.
But, it just felt very, here comes the next toy, and I'm like,
Yeah.
all right. Because they could
Very.
they could have completely done whatever she brought to this movie, they could have completely wrote around that.
Mm-hmm. She brought the comedy.
Mm,
Like she was comic, like that was her role. So like the marvelness of the thing, like we need a buddy. We need someone who's gonna make the wisecracks. And in the first movie, it was what's his face, Bilbo Baggins, right? The FBI guy, right? Because
yes.
they were he was following along and being like stupid and staring at stuff and playing that comic character pretty well. The second movie, like he's playing his own role, like there's a whole, and I will get to that, believe me. But like he wasn't a part of the main action, so they needed somebody to kind of like carry that levity, or like Marvel thinks they needed that, and they have the
Yeah.
series coming up, and it's like, okay, who on our roster can fill that role and everything. And that was disappointing to me because Ironheart is dope. I love Ironheart from the comics, and that Tony Stark kind of, the next generation Tony, like a combination of Tony Stark and Spider-Man, because she's also doing what Spider-Man does in Chicago. So
Mhm.
exploring that whole thing is like, so there's a whole bunch there, but then she comes in here and she's basically Marlon Wayans. I maybe not that far, but like I can see, like, from a business, from the Marvel perspective, oh, this is the kind of actor we need in this role to be the comedy relief. There's something that a Marlon Wayans type would do well. Let's shoehorn in something that propels us to the next thing. Yes.
I will say I certainly did not get that vibe off of her in the comics. You know what I'm
Right. No,
saying?
no, no,
Like,
not even close. Yeah.
right. So
Right. And I think they've done that before, where like you get the sidekick in the movie and then they split it off and the show is better, or like the independent thing is better. I can't think of a specific example right now, but like I don't know, like maybe like a Drax or something. Like, they're in
mm,
they're in the big movie, all they have time for is the joke, and then they get their own kind of feature and it's a little bit more, depth. So I have no doubt that they'll rescue that in the show, but the fact that that was our first taste of it and the role that it was in, yeah,
yeah,
it was definitely Marvel-tastic there.
yeah.
So let's talk about the Browns. So
Please,
we ready for the Browns? Let's do the Browns. Okay.
always.
So yes, I love this. All right. So Ryan Coogler makes a decision. This is a Ryan Coogler decision, right? I mean, I bet
Mhm.
Marvel wanted Namor,
Yes,
because Marvel wants all the characters, like every single. They're gonna scrape the bottom of the barrel on that one.
yes.
So it's like, okay, here we go. Have some Namor for you.
And the fans want him.
The fans want you'll find fans that want everybody. you'll, find
Yes.
you'll find fans of the Eternals. You'll find fans of,
But he was a front runner.
was he? Okay. All right.
He was. Yeah.
I mean, he's his Silver Age guy, right? So I think
Mhm.
so there are, it's not like that he was made up in 2006.
Right.
So it's a Silver Age. I think all the fans are gonna want like all the Silver Age represented, and we want some Silver Surfer. If I'm gonna name some Silver Age, I want some Silver Surfer done a lot better than it was in the last one. But please, we'll see what happens with that. That was my guy back in the day. Anyway,
I'm always reluctant to be critical of that movie because of the Lawrence Fishburne connection. But
mm,
yes,
mm. He was
but it was
not
a bad
Silver
movie.
Surfer. No, he was not that. Anyway, so okay, so Marvel asked for Namor, and maybe Marvel said, okay, change him up a little bit. Ryan Coogler gives us the integration of Mesoamerican. It was very kind of, and we'll get into it. It's like, okay, what are they really? Are they Mayan? Are they Aztec? Are they? It was kind of a hodgepodge, which was a little bit of a difficulty for me. So it's like, okay, it's tough to totalize the whole Mesoamerican experience, but
Yes.
but it was respectful, and it was a mighty civilization. So it's like, okay, I'll be on the ride with this. So Namor is now Namor, no love, no amor. And they did the whole origin story. It's like, okay, Namor is not just like whatever. I don't even know, like just the Guardian of Atlantis in the comics. And I was never a Namor person, so I don't know. I don't
Right.
care.
Yeah.
Point, I
Same.
don't care. I mean, I didn't even
Yes.
care enough to research that for this conversation. Uh,
But that's basically what it was.
whatever, yeah. So they
Mhm.
turn this character into someone who has this pathos and this origin story that is told in the context of colonization, that his culture and his peoples were genocided, and they were very open about that. They know whitewashing that, and that they were able to kind of marvel their way through. And he happened to become this mutant, and then everybody else kind of evolved into this like secret civilization. They're gone for 500 years, and now because the world is globalizing, because we're finding this natural resource, vibranium, now we're starting to bring in this new civilization. Okay.
Mhm.
So then we get Namor. So then I just, how did you react to that? Just on a surface level, what was your first reaction? Like just seeing it off of the screen.
I was with it. I was like, this is working for me.
Mm.
Right now, I will admit that I was kind of like, well, how many unknown powerful civilizations are we going to encounter? But that aside,
Yeah.
I was like, yo, this is a really smart
Mm-hmm.
touch, and it's a fascinating inverse to what they've done with Wakanda.
Yes.
So I was with it.
Mm-hmm. I was okay. So it's the tale of the good and the difficult, for me. And I'm Puerto Rican, and I'm from Sunset Park, Brooklyn, right? And that's gonna come in. Believe me, that'll come in a little bit. I'll talk about that. So there was two parts that really worked for me. One was Namor himself, Tena Corta. That dude killed it. That dude, the physicality,
Yeah.
looked the part, doing the whole thing of like, he learned how to swim, and he's kind of physically preparing himself for the role and everything. Which, if you're, we get this, like if you're a minority and you're cast into a big role, you better bring the goods. There is no room for mediocrity.
Yeah.
And there will be no lack of people to say, oh, they should have just kept Namor white, but she just kept Namor the quote. They may not even say the white part. Some people say the white part, but most people say they just should have kept Namor quote unquote the way it was.
Hmm.
If they're not correct, that wasn't excellent. He was excellent.
Absolutely.
So they brought that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, mm-hmm.
And I was so taken with his performance, and especially because I didn't really have a reference for him going into it. So not only was he good at it, he was wisely cast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they need this character to stand out in ways, even when he's not like flying or whatever, right? They need him to be very magnetic, and he is. He
Mm-hmm.
absolutely is.
Mm-hmm. And it was important that it was him and someone from his descendant background, because we could easily say, okay, the Mexicans were descended from the indigenous peoples and kind of like do the mishmash there. If we know Mexican society, and if we know, just kind of Latino society in general, we're stratified.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when it's like, okay, get us a Mexican actor, it's like the whitest white guy that ever whited, because we got that.
Yes.
And especially on the women's side, most Mexican women who have any notoriety, celebrities, and everything, very, very white skin. We're very colorist
Yes.
in
Yes.
our
Yes.
society, right? And then this
Mhm.
happens in the Caribbean, this happens in Mexico. Like we're very, that we read that as caste, we read that as status, and that like everything, white skin, marry white, and all that kind of stuff. So it's like that's just pervasive. So then you got this guy that is straight up. Yeah, I figured exactly where the descendancy from it. It wasn't from one of the big three or something from a whatever, but like he was just he wears his indigeneity on his sleeve.
Yeah.
And when you get deeper down into Mexico, when you get south of Mexico City, Teotihuacan, then you get a lot of indigeneity. And that role was showing forth that end of Mexican culture that is keeps the marriage of Mexico and indigeneity alive in a much more profound way than like, cities or the North or whatever it is. So
Mm-hmm.
the fact that they cast him and they played that up, and apparently his pronunciation was excellent. I couldn't even. I'm not even going to try. But apparently, like just like people from that end. Speaking of representation, like it wasn't just like Mexico that responded to him. It was that part of the world that is more connected to the indigeneity responded to him in particular.
Mm.
I was not impressed by Namor, the character. It's kind of like, bad guy, or anti-hero, good guy, something bad happened to me and I'm going to get revenge and I'm going to do. So like the character wasn't like, as a character wasn't that magnetic, but the performance and the meaning behind the performance, that's what got me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. For
couldn't,
an anti-hero, he's very anti.
yeah.
Like, I just killed your mother.
Yeah, right. And I'll be back in a week.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
you know that worked for me, and so that's number one. So that was banging. Number two is a big disagreement like that people have been talking about in terms of reaction. The blacks and the browns, the first thing they do when they share a movie, this is one of the first movies, big budget movies, where the blacks and the browns are taking center stage, right? And not just like not just like people, but like whole cultures, right? They fight.
Mm-hmm.
They fight. And all that. People have problems with that. They're like, finally, black and brown people are on the screen and they're fighting. I don't like that. They should be getting together and battling white supremacy and battling this and battling that. And I think you mentioned it on your pod with Aaron that like we got time for that.
Yeah.
This isn't the first one. This isn't the last one. We got time to let that story unfold. And
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
and Ryan Coogler is from Oakland. The blacks and the browns fought. They
Mm-hmm.
fought in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Like I remember, like I wasn't. I thank goodness my mom kind of moved us away, but we were on the outskirts of it, and I would hear stories of like the Land Kings and the Crips, and they're fighting over not even a corner. They're fighting over a mailbox, and there's caps and there's police tape and like they would like the gang war, like you see the after effects of it, like you could hide the regular stuff's happening at night, but like you couldn't hide the after effects. So
Yeah.
like there's fighting, and that
Yeah.
felt real, and they're fighting over stupidity. And that's what this movie felt like. They're fighting over something stupid. They're fighting over this okay, we're gonna attack all the whites now. It's like we're gonna conquer the world. It's like you're not gonna conquer the world. I'm gonna conquer you. It's like, what is happening here? This is ridiculous.
Mm.
But then I felt like, no, that's real. People fight over ridiculousness. They fight over territoriality and control all the time.
So, my thing with that was how refreshing, even if this is the only time it ever happens, how refreshing is it to see two world powers go at it in a superhero context? And because it's a superhero context, they must fight.
Right.
That's the thing that must happen.
Right.
So once we understand that is the thing that must happen, they just basically excise all white people out of it.
Right.
Except for very sparing parts. And it's kind of funny because they're kind of fighting over control of something that they know that white people want.
Mm-hmm.
Like one is trying to keep it from them, and the other was trying to keep it from them. And the battle is just about how to keep it away from white folks.
Nice.
And I'm like, I'm with that. I can
how to
watch
resist white folks because
yeah.
Wakanda has this instinct to withdraw and to kind of like play their game and do their thing. And this dude is mad because he had I think that in the lore of he was alive for 500 years. He saw the direct impact in a way that Wakanda kind of didn't see, because the Wakanda Africa has all sorts of problems, but Wakanda, they didn't get that direct impact of like the white people doing this. But this guy lost his mother, lost his family, and he has that harbored memory.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's bringing his trauma, and it's like, no, there's no biding our time here. We taking the fight to them, and you guys are going to help me. Right?
And the way that you are dealing, this is him to Wakanda. The way that you are dealing with white people is dangerous.
Right.
I need you to stop doing that too.
Right.
Right. You finna expose something
Right.
they
Right.
don't
Right.
need to have no business
All
in.
right.
They
Mm-hmm.
they have proven they can't handle.
You had a
I'm like, yo,
great.
give me. I'll
Mhm.
take 2.5 hours of that.
Right. You had a great line of because I've been following you, man. You after the first Black Panther, and you said something like, "Okay, people are expecting it's a black movie. We're gonna get Malcolm X versus MLK," and we got Carmichael. We got
Oh yeah,
we got all the different traditions of black intellectual life. We got Cornel West. We got
right,
like this movie
right.
came at you from multiple angles with the different black reactions to
Yes,
whiteness. And so like so this movie kind of kept going with that, where it's like there are different strains of resistance to the incursions and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I didn't love the Killmonger performance, but I think what Killmonger represented was, y'all doing it wrong.
well, it certainly had a criticism that was valid and an execution that was not, right?
Mm.
So, you know,
Yeah.
it's a self-destructive execution, right? So
Mm-hmm. And I guess like, just to kind of as an aside, Killmonger makes an appearance in this movie. I wasn't feeling that one either. You
you didn't
know,
like the appearance?
I like the appearance. I didn't like it didn't take Shuri in the direction in which Killmonger wanted, because like, Killmonger's like, kill them all. And Shuri's like, okay, I'm gonna stage this elaborate, trap, and we're gonna do this and that third thing. So I just
Yeah.
think I didn't like. I guess I wanted Shuri to kind of kick some ass and light fire to stuff and like actually take vengeance out and then have your, but it felt like they kind of ran up until time constraint because they're telling this massive story. We're already at 2.5 hours, so it's like it was almost like they missed 20 minutes of like just Shuri wrecking stuff.
Or they ran into Marvel, right? So
The Marvelness of it. So like I guess
yeah,
so. You're right.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
I think
that's the
that's
side.
also very likely, right? Like, well, we can't have two people who are just willing to hit the nuclear, you know what I'm saying? Like,
All right.
yeah. At some point, like, I think that there's only so much Shuri as Black Panther can do, even in response to everything that had happened, because at the end of the day, she has to go make another movie and appear in about
Yep.
3 other movies
Yep.
in which the motivations are very clear in black and white,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yep. And they don't have to star the show. They got to show up and they got to, point their laser at something. And that's basically the sum total of that.
Yeah. And if every time she shows up in something else, they're trying to throw her in jail, then that's not really the character that we need, you
Right.
know?
Right. Uh, okay. So, although what I will say is they tried that with Wanda. Like she has her own
Mm,
show. They make her the good guy. Now they make her the bad guy in Doctor Strange, and now like she kind of walks away after being the bad guy. She's gonna be the good guy again, and it's like, ooh, this is bad. I'm not feeling this at
yeah,
all.
that was just a
So
bit of a mess.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not feeling that. Anyway, so I
Yeah.
so I like that. I like the main character, and I like the gang warfare. This is how we respond to white incursion, right? And the differences between the two, it felt that felt the dynamic felt really good. Where I had the difficulty, and there's a lot of my friends had this difficulty as well, was the rest of it, the rest
Mm,
of Talocan. And it just felt very like, okay, when you, so like among Hispanic people, right? Like there's a criticism of us in regular media. And the trend that's happened, and Breaking Bad really kind of blew this out, but there's like there's like a whole subgenre of this. When you film Latin places, you don't just film it. You got to have like the yellow screen
mm,
so it looks like gritty. They do the same thing with like in Middle Eastern places. So we share that with the Middle East too.
yeah.
24 did that. And so like you had, Narcos was basically filmed entirely in the yellow screen. Like
Right.
you're in a dangerous place now. You're in a gritty place now, which like you're in a Hispanic place now. Right. So so we bear that. Like okay, this is white people doing white people stuff. This is how we show us. So like, okay, when we get into this movie where we're theoretically supposed to be like this independent country and dope, we go from yellow to blue. Damn, yo, why can't we just be that? And okay, they're in Atlantis. So like they snuck us in through the vehicle of Atlantis, so they have to do Atlantis stuff. But it's like, damn.
So now let me ask you this. So now did you have conversation? I must imagine that you did, but did you have conversations about the fact that he is not blue and
Mm,
all of his
mm,
folk is blue? I mean, we
yes.
understand why that happened in the story, but
Yeah, the mutant stuff in there.
the
Yeah.
symbolism,
Mm-hmm.
did you have discussions about that?
I mean, not but I so I don't know if I have the discussion that you're thinking of.
Okay.
I think it's more a sense of like, okay, we're used to, and I guess this gets to the colorism thing, right? We're used to having like actors picked out of our culture and like, okay, this is it, right? So like here's Menudo. We're gonna take out this guy, Ricardo Martin. He's now Ricky Martin, and we're gonna go with this, and then everyone can do their thing.
Right,
Like
right.
we're like I guess that's the kind of conversation that we have in terms of like the extraction of a certain one that we need, and then everybody else can kind of chill.
Gotcha.
That's the kind of conversation we're having. So I don't know what you're thinking of.
No, I was just curious because, like, if they had done something very similar on the black side, we'd have
Mm,
found a way to pick that out. But oh, our leader has to look like this, but everybody else gets to be blue, or something. I don't
mm,
know how that plays out, but I mean, in the story explains it just fine, right? There's no
yeah.
necessarily ill intent about it, right?
It makes
So
sense within the story, like because they're playing the
yeah,
Atlantis thing, and like it totally makes. I think like I think of this way about a lot of things. There's nothing wrong with a lot of cultural presentations. It's just we're living in an ignorant cultural context. So like in look at his,
Whew,
look at his eyes.
oof,
So I mean, so because there's so few like culture wide representations, and because of the ones that we have are so difficult, so whenever we get another one, it just feels like the stakes are higher. And like we have
mm,
more thoughts about it because we have this we have very limited context. Whereas like you have your regular like white folks aren't looking at Hawkeye and like, okay, oh, he's just another Robin Hood. They're not doing that because they have 100 archers. They have 100 of those paradigms. We get three in terms of what it or whatever, however you want to count it. So like it stands out that like we in popular movies nowadays we have this kind of yellow screening trend, and we are narcos, we're drug dealers or whatever, and that's on the Hispanic side. On the indigenous side, it's very romanticized, like it's like Dances with Wolves and the noble savage, and so and there's a timelessness to it, like the like native peoples in movies and literature have no history. Like this is the way it's always been, like they crossed the Bering Strait with the feathers and the whatever, and it's like that's the way they've been for 13,000 years, which is complete nonsense.
right.
They had agriculture, they had irrigation, they built cities, they lost cities, they moved around. There's a whole history there, but that's never presented. So it combined a couple of difficult strains into this one kind of presentation, which on its own makes sense in the context of the movie. But on the Hispanic side, why they blue? Why can't we just be multicolored like we are, right?
Mhm.
And on the indigenous side, like they're still playing the same stone on a wall ball game that they played 500 years ago. They're still using, that one. I had to admit, it's like I literally put my face palm on there. Like, so if people don't know what I'm talking about, like there's an ancient ball game that the indigenous Mesoamericans played, especially, and we played in the Caribbean as well. We played with a rubber ball. Yes, we had the invention of a rubber ball, and there was a stone circle on walls, like kind of sticking out of the wall. So it's like you either throw it or kick it, or like a soccer type thing. So we had ball games, and so that's the kind of thing that you put in order to kind of show, oh, I know Mesoamerican culture. Look, I know about that. And it's like, and I'm looking at it going, oh, like seriously, when they make movies about like white folk, they don't put the pilgrim hat on with the big buck. John Wayne isn't showing up with that.
Right,
The
right.
Indiana Jones not going to show up with the big pilgrim hat. They get to be their own thing. But when the indigenous folks do it, it's this timeless thing where they're just kind of like taking the pastiche and whatever it is. And we're still using spears. We're still like the a lot of the weapon, and it's a dope spear. Like these spears, like you can throw them and they explode and all that kind of stuff. But why is it based on a spear?
Mm.
So there was a kind of I was a little bit surprised to see how, especially on the indigenous side, because I got different circles and everything. On the indigenous side, there was like, oh man, they're like, what? There was some difficulty with the presentation of the whole culture. And yeah, and they try to say it's like, okay, more white supremacy. It's like, no, this is not white supremacy. This is just this is a black man in a black outfit trying to do their best.
Mm.
That's how I took it. So I was able to kind of give it some grace, but I definitely have to acknowledge that like a native filmmaker would not have gone that route.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's interesting because at the end of the day, Ryan Coogler has to make this film has to accomplish a lot of
Yes.
first that aren't first, right? In the real world.
Right.
But in the Marvel universe, they're first. And in blockbuster films of the last 20 years, they're first.
Right.
And so there's a little bit of cultural rewinding happening there. I think, as if, people are going to come to this and they're never going to have seen this on film. And so we need to kind of use these touchstones. And so I think that,
Yes.
it's certainly, I take your point, right? Like you kind of wish it didn't have to be done that way, but I guess he felt, that the audience wouldn't entirely make all of the leaps that, we want them to make. So.
Right. Yeah. I hear that. So I think like, please tell me if I'm, if I'm off here. So they did use like animal pelts, spears, and like traditional African stuff for Wakanda. Right.
In parts. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In parts. Right. And especially like, like using the big rhino, and the rhino had like armor. And so they were able to kind of take some of that traditional stuff and just kind of like, Afrofuturism it and make it whatever it looked like, especially in the first movie. And I think what Ryan Coogler's doing is like, okay, let's do that, but for this culture too. Let's take what was traditional in their culture and kind of like flesh that out. And I think it emphasizes to me that like you can't just kind of take a paradigm that works in one marginalized group and kind of apply it to another one.
Yeah, and they're not sides of the same coin, right? Like, there's a great otherness, to the other culture, right? And I think that's largely intentional on Coogler's part. Wakanda being cut off from the rest of the world isn't really cut off from the rest of the world. They have presence at the United Nations.
Mm-hmm.
They've just been lying to the United Nations, right? They've been covering up and pretending to be, this very, agricultural driven nation or whatever. And but Namor's, whole thing is like that is cut off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dalakan is this like a whole world apart. Yes.
Right. And so I think the argument there would be, and I'm not making the argument, I'm just presenting what it might be creatively, is that, this is a culture that has not been paying. It is a culture without white gaze, right? It is a culture that is not participating in white culture at all, right? And they're not, they're not coming up and hanging out with white folks. White folks ain't seen them, nothing. And so that, arguably those cultures would, that would develop differently that way. They would probably retain more, very original primal culture parts of, with other culture.
Yeah, it was like Wakanda, the time. Yeah, they would have a history, but the time will be extended. Right, stuff. It will take longer for things to evolve.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Okay, I'll buy it. I
guess mean, that's. I think that's if they were inclined to debate it, I think they might do it that way.
Right.
I'm not trying to create that debate, but yeah.
I mean, we're talking about different reactions, right, to cultural presentations, and I think like I just emphasizing the fact that it's not a one-to-one. Like like presenting Black culture and Afrofuturism and like African and African indigeneity, but like through the Marvel Afrofuturist lens, and you can't really just replicate it in the indigenous culture. Like effort needs to be made to like I really enjoyed like the water bombs, like those were dope. And just how talk about futuristic, but like from their culture and everything. I'm like, more of that. That is like they weren't throwing those in 15th century, and so like more so it was there, right? But there was also kind of what you said before, like the tropes, and people have to kind of read it and all kind of stuff. So yeah, okay, I could feel you, but then, but the more radical response of like, okay, they're misrepresenting indigeneity, even as they're trying hard, they're still, I feel that critique too. So
Yeah.
I kind of feel like where they're coming from. So
Mhm.
yeah, so like it's a tale of two. There's good and there's difficult, but at the end of the day, and as someone else made this point, it's like, okay, at the end of the day, like we got represented Hispanic, Indigenous, like whatever mix you kind of play out, we got represented, and it took a black director to do it.
Yeah.
It took a black franchise to do it, like because
Well, it took the most successful black director ever to do it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Is he the most successful black director? Is that a
I mean, based off the first Black Panther, I would say yes.
mhm.
I don't know how you want to gauge that.
Right? Yeah, I guess in
Like
terms of like
maybe not off of body
popularity
of
and
work, maybe. I don't know. But
right.
if you like start doing if you start doing like profit corrections off of Oscar Michaud films from the 1930s or
Right.
whatever, perhaps,
Mm-hmm. So we covered a lot of the blacks. We covered a lot of the browns. You
the
have
blacks
anything
and
to,
the browns,
if you
yes.
got anything to say about the blacks and the browns, speak now, forever hold your peace, because I got one more piece.
I'm good. I think we hit all the things that everybody else isn't hitting.
Let's talk about the whites.
No.
You mentioned before, right, that whiteness kind of takes a backseat in the movie.
Kind of, yes. Mhm.
Yeah, explain what you mean.
Well, again, all of these conflicts that we see are still happening under this umbrella of what will white people do when they see us, right?
Mm,
So there's still a lot of gaze happening, although the gaze has very high stakes,
hmm.
right?
Right. So another trend of criticism in some of the circles that I run in, like mostly online circles, this movie was like okay, I'll just say it. Like this movie kisses the ass of the CIA. This movie kisses the ass of, what white cultures would really do if there was a such thing as a Wakanda and a Talakar and all kind of stuff. Like the instant that white culture, white European and all that kind of stuff, find out that there's this like magical resource in, somewhere around the world, there would be a full scale governmental societal effort to try to like, okay, no, that's mine now. We can't trust you with that. We can't trust the darkies with that. We can't trust this with that. So people have, and our national culture is very invested in radically underplaying how in everything the US is, how in everything the CIA is. There is not a single government in Latin America that has not felt the touch of the CIA.
Yes.
And or even in Africa, there is not a single government in Africa that has not felt the touch of colonization, white supremacy, and all kind of stuff. I read this thing just today, and I wasn't even looking, but it was just kind of like this thing I clicked that because at the beginning part of the movie, it shows like the French it's like a special forces unit trying to like sneak in, and the Okoye's there, and catches them, and like Ramonda kind of troops them in. It's like, no, this is your warning, don't come after us.
Mm-hmm.
The French government actually kind of put out a statement that says we're offended by this representation of our troops.
Okay. Okay.
We're offended that like, oh, the French would ever decide, ever deign to come into an African country and extract their resources.
Mm. Okay. So half the continent of Africa speaks French. Okay. All right.
Kidding? And
Because
like
we
look at
like it.
and the French museums, and like all the like half the cultural treasures in Africa are sitting there. Some French museum or English museum, and it's like, if this was a truly Wakanda, like I'm looking at those like those council scenes where there's like maybe 10, 20 people. At least 20% of those people would have been like ops for the CIA. Legit, bro. Like like, or like they would have been like some like new tribe, like the alligator tribe. It's like, okay, who is going to challenge for the throne? Okay, the alligator tribe's coming. Who the hell are they?
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. The feds right at the like seriously like and people think that I'm like kidding. I just read about this. Like they talked about this BLM protest happened 2020. There was a story in Colorado of a CIA agent infiltrating the BLM protests, pushing them towards further violence
Right.
to make them to break the unity apart, to make it violent, to give the impression that BLM is violent, so that
Yes.
the nice moderate white folk can like, oh my god, BLM, Marxist violence, whatever. A lot of the times it's the CIA that's infiltrating these groups and cultivating that kind of chaos. That's what COINTELPRO is all about.
Absolutely.
Go ahead and read that. Do you think that stopped in
Right.
1975? Heck no. I mean, so I just like that's what they would do. That's what they have done, and that's what they would do in Wakanda. They it wasn't like there was this scene where like Bilbo, I'm gonna call him Bilbo, whatever his name is, and Julia Louis Dreyfus, they're in like they're like meeting with like other CIA agents. The CIA is like, you know what? I think maybe at some day we might have to invade, and like we don't want that to happen. Hell no. That conversation would have been happened in 5 seconds, and they would have just done it.
Yeah.
But they make it look like, oh well, we're the nice colonists, and we're gonna ask you nicely before we you are the ones that are holding out.
Right.
We're trying to be the propaganda, the gaslighting, and
Yeah.
and Marvel. I'm sorry to go on, but
No, please.
I got to vent my spleen about this stuff. Like Marvel is in bed with the United States Department of Defense. Like it took why part of why the very first Iron Man was so successful was because what's the very first scene of that movie? A bomb going off. And the whole movie showed F-15s and military order, like that counts. Like people resonate with that. Why is Top Gun popular? Not because of like it's a good movie, it's because they want to see planes go vroom.
Right.
That's what Top Gun's all about. So like they put that in Iron Man, and that kind of forwarded the ball. Like the relationship is not like a 1-to-1. It's not like the military telling Marvel what to do. Matter of fact, there was
Right.
like a split at one point. They kind of dropped off, but then they come back, whatever. But you look at the credits of WandaVision, they're thanking the Department of Defense explicitly. It's right there,
Hmm.
and so there is a propagandistic edge to this movie and I'm not. I have to be really careful. This is not conspiracy theory, but I'm not saying it's like Marvel's control. I'm not saying the military is controlling, but there is influence. And
You're
the
not going to
difficult,
get an argument from me.
and I think when it comes to the cultural piece, right? And so let's bring
Mhm.
it back down to the culture.
Sure.
Like, not our militaristic police state is there's a lot of investment in minimizing the role of the military and the police in the way things are, the hierarchy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And if you don't know, then Marvel plays its role and Disney plays its role in like making it believe like this world is the way it is because it's just natural.
Well, and they do this thing where they pretend like there is enough good apples in
Yes,
these systems, in these horrifically powerful, painful from inception systems, that there's enough good apples to offset the bad apples. And
that's
it's
the
like, no,
exact role that Bilbo Baggins is playing.
right. And it's
He
like,
is
dude, this isn't
yes,
even, he's not even an apple, right? Like he's a seed inside of an apple that's already been picked and thrown away, right?
right,
It's the CIA, you
right.
know, there are no good apples in the CIA.
There are no like people. We will say things like there are no good cops, right? And people are like, oh no, I know a good cop. I know this and their thing. It's like we're
You
not
know a
saying that
good
there's
person who's a cop,
right.
maybe,
Yeah,
right? That's what you know. But the
right.
minute they got to go to work, that becomes something else.
The minute they see somebody else in the blue misbehaving, they're
They have
not
become something else,
right.
right?
And a lot of times, it's not who you are; it's what you tolerate.
Yeah, there's a reason why you've only really seen, like, in the last couple of years, I think I've only seen one video of a cop, a woman, who tried to stop
Right.
like another cop from doing, and he wore her out. Like he attacked her. for trying to stop him from attacking a person. I think that's the only time I've seen that on tape, and I don't know what happened to that woman.
Right. They've done those studies like because they talk about how do we address police brutality and how do we do that, like the places that have like the black white thing is it doesn't work out, right? Like because as we saw with Tyree Nichols, doesn't matter if it's black, if it's white, it's whatever, but the woman man thing actually does work out in a way, like where there's more women cops and where women cops more frontline, there's less instinct for police brutality. So I'm not surprised hearing that.
Yeah, that the only instance that we know of on tape is a woman. Sure. Yeah.
Right. All right. So we're talking about the police, talk about military. We're talking about like and inseparable from whiteness, right? Inseparable from the concept of whiteness. And people are gonna hear that, they're like, oh well, they that's not me, that's not whatever. But like we're not talking about individual people. We're talking about cultures, and we're talking about why is whiteness like I think you said it beautifully before. The blacks and the browns spend the movie deciding how to respond to the whites.
Yes.
Right. And what makes the whites, what calls attention to the whites? Why are the whites able to exert this power? They're able to exert this power, raw fact, not because of anything mystical, because they got the guns, they got the military, they got the police. And there's lots of ways to do it. And one of the ways to do it is to hide the influence of the military and the police. And that's what, so ultimately, like, but my and it's not a disappointment because I kind of see it coming, but when you talk about a movie that like quote unquote addresses colonization, I've heard a lot of discourse about this movie. It's like, okay, they mentioned the fact that the conquistadors came over, and by the way, that's also a trope. Like the Spanish were the bad colonists; they were evil, they were whatever, and then the white people are the reasonable colonists. No,
right.
No, that trope was so that I'm like, nah, we're not doing that. Anyway, I'm gonna call that out. That's number one.
Yeah.
But like the idea that like this movie quote unquote addresses colonization, yes, it does, but in this way that radically soft pedals the extent to which whiteness gave itself power then, it continues to give itself power now. How whiteness comes into communities and breaks them apart. They don't ask. They don't debate. There's no good apples and bad apples, kind of, and who can win. No, that as you said, those good apples are on the roadside.
Yeah,
and that's
and
not
it's kind of no. Go ahead.
Well, that's not like people like oh well, that is that a conspiracy theory? It's not a conspiracy theory. I'm not saying it's like the whites exert control, but they do exert leverage and influence, and they use that to create hierarchy.
Yeah. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's just a conspiracy, right? So it's just history,
Yes.
And I think it's very interesting in a film like this, in which we are dealing with kind of these fairly heavy geopolitical implications, and and on a world at this point at a worldwide scale.
Yeah.
Right. And yet, white people are, worldwide, are not the majority of the people, on the planet.
Right. Yeah.
They're just the majority of the people in power, and the majority of the people with the weapons, and the majority of the people that are, kind of controlling these types of situations. And so it's interesting to have a culture, in South America that is minding its own business, and a culture in Africa that is minding its own business. And they come into conflict the minute that white people come into their sphere of influence, right? It's an agitation, right? And I get that these are not documentaries, right? I get that these are not dramas. These are superhero films, right? They're comic book films, and so there must be, some sense of the inflated tension. There must be inflated conflict, right? That like it isn't that without that, unfortunately, right? This isn't Ghost World or whatever. So we must have these elements. And I think that, Black Panther 2, it at least shows us a way into telling those kinds of stories with those kinds of values and those kinds of context, right? It says, look, we understand it. Even in an ideal situation where we don't have to, like, if we're just at the cookout hanging out, and then the white person calls the cops on us, that affects the cookout.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so this film is kind of like, well, it was kind of, kind of doing our thing. Here they come.
Mm-hmm.
And the first film was kind of doing that too, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this one, in my opinion, kind of raises the cultural stakes by, combining cultures of color, right?
Right.
And then ultimately by the end, while I wouldn't say there was a peace, there was certainly
An agreement. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
a parlay, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
something here.
I mean, they set it up so that, because clearly the rest of the, like, or represented by, I think there was the one woman character in Talocan, saying, okay, no, why are we to make your friends with the Wakandans? And the Namor is like, they saved my life. And I recognize the benefits of having Wakanda as an ally, setting it up so that, okay, if he lives, then the things would be cool. But
Yeah.
if he were to somehow get off,
Yeah.
we're right back to fighting amongst ourselves. So
Yeah.
that was cool. I dug that.
I will be curious to see in the future, should there be an instance where Wakanda and Namor are in the same movie, series, whatever, and we understand that it's not just like a Black Panther thing or whatever, it's like something else, and
Right.
these characters are appearing in it. It would be interesting to see their interaction in a white context.
Mm-hmm.
I would be like, the Avengers or whatever,
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
wherever you have these two sets of cultures at the table, but the table is a white table. I will be interested to see how they play out.
Mm-hmm.
Are they like kind of like, fist bumping in the back? Like, if somebody says like, you're a killer, and then both of them jump up and like, well, y'all are the biggest killers,
Right.
like, I can't wait for that to kind of happen and see where that goes.
It reminds me, so I used to work in justice, right? I worked in juvenile justice, and basically, you're dealing with, a largely POC populace that has to interact with whiteness, which is in this particular case the courts. So I used to,
Mhm.
help kids, like kind of be their advocate, and they're doing good, and please don't give a big sentence or whatever it is. And there was once, I just thought of this when you thought of that, right?
Mm.
There was once like a Spanish kid and a black kid, and they got knocked together, right? And stealing iPhones, like that's the stupidest stuff they do. And in my naive brain, I'm thinking, okay, let's get the moms together and get their heads together, like that, so that we can present a united front and all kind of stuff. But I'm looking at them like they're not getting along. They're giving each other stink eye. They're, oh, this person's this, and they even blame the other for the misbehaviors of their own kid. So like, okay, don't hang out. I told you not to hang out with him. And I'm thinking to myself, how destructive is this? Like, how,
Mm.
like, there's no way that the white gaze is going to look kindly upon what's happening here if they can't even get along amongst themselves. And I can imagine a situation where, like, you're speaking to, maybe they're at the United Nations or whatever there is, and they're still kind of stink eyeing each other. And they're like, they hate us because you're of your idea,
Mm.
and that would be, the dramatic tension would be there. So I imagine that, like, that's actually more likely than like, okay, let's fist bump and and get along and all that kind of thing. But that's real.
Mm.
That's real. Like, and so, so to any commenter that's like, well, I mean, like culture critic, and the moment is kind of passed for a lot of people, but I just remember the conversations of like, okay, I just want a movie where the blacks and the browns get along. It's like, that's, oh, man, I would love that too, but I, like, that doesn't, like, that's not a demand that I'm gonna make. That, like, because I understand that the opposite feels very real too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot to ask of a superhero film, right?
I mean, and to your point of like, okay, this superhero film, like, why are we doing this deep, like, cultural analysis of like a fictional universe and stuff? Well, they're borrowing from real life, and they're creating the resonance, they're creating the connection. Like the Avengers, part of the dopeness of the Avengers that they're in New York City,
Mm.
and like all the stuff, like, and people can like walk in New York City and imagine like, okay, now a big mecha thing is flying, and that's part of the magic. And if they were just in like, Metropolis or whatever, they're doing it, like, there's not that connection, but like they're in, they're dealing with these cultures and they're dealing with these nations and it's in the world. So if you're gonna borrow some stuff from the world, then that opens the door to criticisms. Okay, why aren't you borrowing this other stuff? So if you're borrowing, 15th century colonization, why aren't you borrowing COINTELPRO?
Mm.
I can, like, that's the door opens once you even begin to open the kind of resin that we're drawn from real life door, and we're trying to replicate in a superhero way, superhero politics. Well, you happen to be representing kind of stuff from the past. Okay, you got colonization, but you mysteriously erase certain things that would really explain why there's no Indian culture. There's no we have Shang-Chi, but like, okay, we have Shang-Chi. That's all, that's what we get. We don't get multiple centers. There's a reason why we don't get this. And that's because of the hierarchy enforcement that's happening and we don't ever talk about. And we don't talk about it because it's not in our cultural media, or partly.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, like when I was talking to Aaron about this on my podcast, like, I had to point out to him, because he's not a big comic guy ever. I'm like, yo, like whenever a hero of color,
Right.
Had their own thing, they had to have villains of color.
Right.
Right. That's just how it had to be. And so the films are going to have to contend with that to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not out of that. We're not out of the comic book woods yet.
Right.
And I think that the Black Panther films go a long way to addressing that, like to trying to get us to another level or to a different aspect of that kind of, if we must have conflict, to change the stakes of that conflict and the motivations of those conflicts.
I mean, it's Black Panther versus Man Ape. We just talked about it. That's what we get in the comics, or it's like, Iron Fist versus Thug number 10.
Right.
Thug, and we all know what thug means.
Right.
And all that kind of stuff.
What,
Yeah.
what were all of Luke Cage's enemies?
Yeah,
Like
yeah. All that.
various
So
black people named Snakes. So all right.
okay, so a big thing of this conversation. Yeah, I know I got my lean off, and Scott has his perspective and criticism and everything. At the end of the day, it's like, okay, this is a black film. This is such a black film in the Marvel box, and there's, it's worth kind of teasing out both aspects of like what was done with, how Ryan Coogler baked the ingredients that he was given and what deliciousness he made, and realizing there's only, like, he could have made different things, but he only had the ingredients to work with. He's working within the box. He's working within the kitchen he has provided. I'm betting there were certain spices that he would love to put in, but they're just not available in the kitchen.
I mean, I guess so, right? Like, we'll never know, but we do know that there was a script before the one that we
Right.
saw, when Chadwick Boseman was still alive, or at least, still in play. And in that film, let me tell you what that film wasn't. Whatever that film was, and we have some idea. There's been some discussion about what was in that script, but we know that it was not a film whose engine, whose every agenda was motivated by black women.
Yes.
Right? Like, this thing is like
we didn't even talk about that. Yes.
Yes. Biggest black woman film ever. Right? Like, it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
I never want, contrary to half of the idiots on Twitter, I never felt like emasculated or anything by this. Like, I was embracing this. I want to see a film, a superhero film, no less, just completely led by black women. Like, just, that was amazing. I was just like, oh, more please, more please, more please. And they got him, Baku. He could have like been all kinds of crazy, but they was like, nah, we gonna turn him, we gonna make him chill. He gonna be in the cut. Like, he totally could have been blown out. And but nah, they was like, nah, we got enough powerful, intelligent, skilled women to run this, to run this. Now, that was just such an amazing hand to play.
that's a separate conversation. And unfortunately, we're this far into the podcast. We haven't talked about women because we're two men. Kind of talk.
Yes,
We have stuff
yes.
in front of us, but it is. I don't want to give this short trip, but I did. So let's spend a little bit of time here. Circling back to the angle. So like, and I guess we're looking at it through the lens of like an M'Baku type character or like a Killmonger type character. So like, what is Killmonger doing? Killmonger is there as a function of Shuri, representing that aspect. And what is M'Baku? M'Baku is um he's at the council and he's representing his interests, he's representing his people, and he how do I say this? Like, like I mentioned before, like he's bouncing off of Queen Ramonda, but he gives deference and respect to Queen Ramonda, but also maintains his own individuality and maleness. Like I never like that's the model, right? And like where he's coming in, he's eating his whatever he's eating, just kind of like kind of chilling, but also, a voice to be taken seriously. Like he was not threatened at all by this. Like, okay, here's a new ruler. I'm gonna do what the new ruler does, and I'm gonna let that person know how I roll. But at the end of the day, show that respect too. And I guess that's how I watched the movie in a way, because I noticed the same thing, and my wife is telling me, it's like, oh, look at these black women, they're beautiful, and I'm looking at it going, okay, there's a role for Namor and there's a role for this, and I feel, yeah, I definitely feel like that I did not to your point, like what's striking is how I did not feel like I was overwhelmed, I was out of place, where's the men? No, not at all.
Hmm.
It was
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. But I do think that's something that most people would have to come to this movie with as a personal value. I don't know if a lot of people had an opposing value, then watch this and then change their mind. I
Right.
think, unfortunately, statistically, that doesn't seem to have been the
Yeah, right.
case. Yeah.
Yeah. I think like and you look at media studies and very few individual movies sway. It's more the collective.
Hmm.
Like if as things become normalized, like they looked at it in terms of like the society's kind of progressive acceptance of like women at the workplace, or like they didn't watch Tootsie and like, okay, now it's fine.
Right.
They didn't watch like we like think about like that episode of The Last of Us, like that's like centering like a gay romance and everything. Like we didn't get there. Like someone who's against gay marriage isn't gonna watch it and go, oh, that's what I'm talking about. It took a lot of different movies and shows to kind of like expose people slowly, bring them along, and then after 5-10 years of continuous presentation, now we're ready for people to be like moved and blown away by the norminess of a gay relationship, a gay male
Yeah.
relationship. And I
Hmm.
think the same is said of like black women in this movie, where it took those pioneers. It took the Viola Davis. It took the Angela Bassett, doing her thing. It took Loretta Devine, expressing black womanhood in her way. And look up all these people if you don't know them. People, this is what we're talking pantheon level. Coming at it from different ways, but then so you get to a movie like this, and like, okay, you have Nakia, who is kind of that, the ops type person. You have, the regal queen, you have the intelligent woman, you have the warrior, you have all these paradigms kind of coming together. And that's what struck me too. It's like there's paradigms of womanhood.
Mm.
It's not just the one, like, function of person. Like Nakia could have easily been a function of T'Challa. But
Mm.
I didn't even get that sense in the first movie. And obviously in the second movie, she's doing her own thing.
Yeah.
So, and that took a long time to set people up for that. And it's just, it's another quarter in the slot. you
My
know,
whole
it's,
life, right? And I'm not young. So yeah.
and we're gonna, and that's why. So representation, we're having these wars. Why is there, black, what's her face, Ariel? We got to fight that fight. And Black Cinderella got that thing. Why is there Black Cinderella? Why is there, like just on and on? Like, why is it important to kind of, gender swap and color swap and all these things and tell these stories over? Because that's the only way we're going to get to real respect and real, like, opportunities for black women to play things and opportunities for, different people from different, like, what's her face? Jenna Ortega played Wednesday. Dope. Oh,
She killed that.
she was magnificent. And it's like, and we're not talking about her Hispanicness as a national culture, but I noticed my people notice that, and it's normal. Oh, like it just me, and that took all that, all
Yeah.
that, all the films that came before, and we're gonna have to keep pushing for that, and resist this backlash to like, well, okay, you guys had your movie. Now let's get back to all this, that, and third thing. No, we're not. No, we're not. No, this is we keep going. We can keep going with the Browns. We're gonna keep going with the blacks. We could go with the men and women and all that kind of stuff. We're doing this,
Yeah,
even within the box, right?
yeah, I mean, there's always some backlash, right? And so we have to weather that along the way. But the backlash is very fluid, right? It's very smart.
Mm-hmm.
It's very good at getting into the nooks and crannies where we're not able to be or pay attention to at all times. And it will have you questioning yourself, right? It will have you questioning representation.
Mm-hmm.
Is this tokenism? Are
Mm-hmm.
they pandering to me? Yeah, probably in some instances, absolutely. But,
Right.
I think that the instances in which that's not true, stand head and shoulders above, you know, Wednesday and Black Panther, these things stand head and shoulders above
Mm-hmm.
those other things, that do those other things.
I mean, I'm comparing it to like what's his face, John Wayne playing Genghis Khan. Compared it, again, I just heard the
Yeah.
story from we were talking about Star Trek for whatever reason, and like the original Captain Kirk was cast as a woman back in the 70s.
Mm,
And some studio exec is like, no, the people aren't gonna want this. Let's get a white guy in here.
yeah.
So like so that gravity towards white maleness is real. It's and so and so that gravity has denied us opportunities. So like even if there's like a pandering aspect to it, okay, well, the other side's getting pandered to all the time. They just don't talk about it that way. We only talk about forced diversity, but we never talk about forced whiteness.
Well, I
How
mean,
else do you
that's so
explain Zack Snyder?
normalized. That's so normalized. We didn't know another word for it, right? So
We
that's just,
should have a word for it, and because
it's just colonized, right? Like everything is just white. Like anybody who even really brings that up is just not trying to have the conversation, a serious conversation, because the math is the math.
right,
There's just no getting around the math, right? Like, if 90% of the feature films, that come out through a major studio or whatever, like the lead, like only like 10% of the leads are people of color.
right,
Like, and that's like an improvement. So like
yeah, yeah,
what are we arguing about
right,
here? Besides the minute that you see somebody black in it or someone of color in it, you probably, if that's your issue, you're not going to go see it. And yet you will manage to still watch 10 movies a day.
yeah.
So what do we debate? What are we arguing about?
What are we talking about? The Super Bowl, where it's like they played Lift Our Voices Up and Sing, and the America the Beautiful, and now we got the people saying, the America the Beautiful was fine, then they had to ruin it with all this wokeness. Like,
Ridiculous.
so talking about like how the backlash kind of stakes and everything, and so like even a conversation like this one, it's like, well, why you guys are going on for an hour talking about white people, and by you're dividing people, you're dividing stuff. And it's like you can't argue with that, I guess. But in terms of the people, because I happen to believe in that there is a middle that is still swayable, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak, and to get the message out there that like just what Scott is saying, the math is the math, and the fact that we have this movie that centers Black women, the fact that we have this movie that gives us a shot at indigeneity, even if it wasn't as there was difficulties in that presentation. Even these tent poles are really important. And it's really important to not only celebrate it, but also to point out the blind spots so that the next character, so that the next movie can think about a little
Hey
bit better.
man,
And hopefully there is a next movie and a next movie and a next movie to kind of keep the ball moving forward.
look, just show me all the YouTube videos where all these white boy critics are talking about our films positively
Mm,
and deconstructing our films positively, right? Just as a matter of course. Like,
right.
oh, now we're going to talk about this. And oh, yes, it's Black, but I want to talk about this because it's art. Like, show me the percentage of those cats who are doing that, and then maybe we won't have to do this, or at least when we do this, it won't feel that way to you.
Right.
Right.
Like we'll mention the word whiteness and it won't be like, oh, what are they gonna do now?
Right. Like 99% of what you saw on YouTube today was not white, right? Like, come on, man. What are we talking about? Math.
So
It's math.
the future, like, what are you looking forward to? Are you looking forward to Black Panther? Are you looking forward to other heroes? Are you looking forward to other kinds of stories? What gets you, even if it isn't like the superhero genre, like what do you look for in terms of the next things in Black cinema?
So I just want, here's the thing, okay? I am no, and I probably shouldn't say this to your audience, but I'm going to. I'm notoriously critical of Black art. Like,
Sure.
I'm pretty hard on it, right?
Yeah.
And when I was coming up, Black art was hard to find. Like, we didn't have a bunch of movies. I grew up during the Blaxploitation era, in the 70s, right? And I was there in the late 80s when Spike Lee came out and basically, recreated Black cinema by himself, right? And so, and I pointed this out online too. Like in I think it was 1990, there were like 4 or 5 Black films, period.
4 or
And not
5
all of
Black
them were
actors in those films.
right,
Wesley
and not all of
Snipes,
them were
Eddie
directed by
Murphy.
Black directors, right? I think like 3 of them were directed by Black directors. And so, and that was it. I don't mean like, oh, there was like some on YouTube. There was no YouTube. Oh, there was some buried in Netflix. There was no Netflix. There was like 4 or 5 that year, the whole year. And so to get to the point where we are now, right? Like back in 1990, you could make a case for representation, like at all costs. That's the case we made all the way through the 70s. All, until we died off apparently in the 80s. So, like, that's the case you make when you have nothing else to hang on to. But we're not in that place anymore as creators, as audiences, as a people, as a community. And so I'm looking for, the Black work that really wants to go next level, that wants to tell next level stories, that isn't just trying to be the first of a thing, right? So for instance, when the Amazon Prime series came, what was the name of it? Them or something? It was a horror series. And I hated that series. But the creator was a Black creator, and he was adamant, like, yo, we don't have nothing like this. And I'm like, I don't want nothing like this, like, but we have to allow for that to some extent, for it to be normalized, right? We have to be allowed to fail,
right,
as well as succeed. But I will tell you that I'm looking forward to those that want to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, I think we mentioned it before about, like, they're not correct, that had to be excellent, or else we would have heard the end of it. Like, it would be nice to have a Black film, a brown film, different types of films that are mediocre. And like, it's not about, it doesn't elicit that forced diversity response. Like, it's just like, we're human. Like, we should be able to have a lot of darts thrown at the board. Some of them hit the bullseye, some of them, claying off the metal.
Yeah.
And like that in a way, like the future in terms of, like, the next steps of Black cinema is going to involve like worse movies. It's going to involve, because it's going to involve more.
Yeah, and I think because it's so much, quote unquote, easier to make a film now than it was in 1990, right? And because it's cheaper to make a film than it was in 1990, and because we have so much canon to refer to, not just Black canon, but white canon as well, or all canons, right? You have the history of cinema at all times at your disposal in a way that you've never had before. Like, to me, that shouldn't compel you to make the next average film. Right? That should compel you to make the next dope film.
Yes.
But, so that's why I'm critical.
And
right?
I guess, like,
I had to wade through all of that to get to here.
Right.
So,
reach for the stars, hit the roof, and not everything is going to reach the star, but as long as we're reaching for the stars, some of those are going to hit the roof. And that'll be okay too. Like you mentioned before, that the example of a like we don't have this, but I don't like this. Like at least that person tried, and it's for somebody, and it's there, and we add to that pile, and I think that's great. Like I want people strive for excellence, and as like anything that you make has a chance.
I just need more balance.
Yeah.
I just a little more balance, right? Because I'm waiting for like my next Eve's Bayou. I'm waiting for like my next Spike Lee, right? So Ryan Coogler can't do it all.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more Black writers in comic books, right? Like I'm waiting for Eve Ewing to kind of pop off with stuff. I'm waiting for the next Christopher Priest, and there's been like the people that are coming in, and and we haven't even talked about like there's more Black queer writers and everything. So yeah, like just an idea of abundance. There should be abundant stuff, and it's like if the next person come in the door, like okay, oh you're here because of representation, and you don't come on in.
And
Come
they're
on
there,
in.
like they're out there, right? We know they're out there. It just takes work to get to them, and we live in a time when you don't feel like you have to work for your entertainment.
Right.
You don't have to work for your entertainment, and so when you do, it's like,
Speaking of rap, remember when you used to have to we make mixtapes by waiting for songs to come on the radio?
Yep.
It's like, oh, the song's coming on. Let me get it. That's work.
Just keep the pause button ready.
That's how people don't know that. It's like, okay, in order to make my mixtape, I gotta like wait for the song. In order to reproduce the tape, I gotta like wait 45 minutes for the song to record and all that kind of stuff. Now it's like, all right, boom, done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, we're way off course over here, but like in terms of what's next, like an abundance paradigm, like obviously we're looking forward to Black Panther, but we're looking for Black Cougar, Black like Tree, Black this, Black there should be all that stuff.
Absolutely. And again,
not
it's
Black
out
Adam,
there. We just have to find it.
Not Black Adam. I'm good with that. That movie. Talk about like aiming for mediocrity. I'm good with whatever that.
I mean, look, there you go, right? That's all the mediocrity I need this year.
That's it.
Some big blockbuster mediocrity, right? I think we're good.
Facilitating the popping of corn and the ingestion of. Oh, Scott, tell people where they can find you.
Well, I'm on all the social medias, like the Instagrams and the Twitters and the Facebooks, and I curate them all a little differently, so you get a little different experience on all of those. But my writings and all of that, if you I think probably the easiest way to get it is through my Instagram. And my bio link takes you to, like a link tree, and it has all the action. So,
yep. Scott Woods writes, Scott Woods, there's all sorts of different Scott Woods. And like you see the diversity of thought, man. We just brushed surface like with one movie, but the man knows poetry, the man knows books, the man knows comics, the man knows a lot.
This large, is not a Zoom background.
He is large and contain multitudes. That's a double bass. I learned that. That's not a cello. That's a double bass.
That is correct.
Back there. So thank you very much. This has been an awesome time.
No, thank you so much. It's always a blast.
If you can change your mind, you can change the world, people. So until next time, bye everybody.